Hello, my name is Eric, and this is Daily Drivers, where we investigate whether or not various operating systems are seriously usable on a day-to-day basis. Today we'll be looking into DOS, the main operating system for IBM-compatible PCs from the early 80s through the mid-90s. I'd like to point out that just like the other systems we've already discussed, DOS is still in use today and is even kept up to date. Kind of. We'll get to that in a bit. And please note that it is pronounced DOS, not DOS. Sorry, Spanish speakers, it's not MS-2. For anyone born before about 1990 or so, DOS is the familiar command line operating system that ran what we used to call IBM-compatible PCs, although that phrase fell out of use and was replaced with things like Wintel. Anyway, on modern Windows, when you open cmd.exe or command prompt, it's emulating DOS. I don't remember what command.com does on modern NT systems. Maybe try to emulate DOS better than CMD? I can't remember. On Windows 95, 98, and ME, opening an MS-DOS prompt opens actual DOS in a window. I want to add here that, at least before the 90s or so, DOS didn't necessarily mean a system that looked and or acted like MS-DOS. DOS just stands for Disk Operating System, and there were many systems that were called DOS. Systems like Amiga-DOS, Apple-DOS, Atari-DOS, Commodore-DOS, PT-DOS, R-DOS, TRS-DOS. There's a lot of them. If you're interested, you can check the Wikipedia page titled List of Disk Operating Systems called DOS. DOS has no included graphical interface. You can get GUIs of various types, most notably Windows, but those are all add-ons and not part of the OS. For that matter, DOS doesn't natively support a mouse. You have to install a driver just to get a pointer device. When people think of DOS, chances are they're thinking of MS-DOS, which Microsoft leveraged on their path to dominating the PC OS market. Originally created in 1980 by Tim Patterson at Seattle Computer Products as a clone of another OS called CP/M, the original name was QDOS, or Quick and Dirty OS, and it got renamed to 86DOS. Microsoft licensed and then outright bought 86DOS from SCP, and then licensed it to IBM, who called it PC-DOS, and included it as one of the OSs for the original IBM personal computer, which is where the term PC came from. Microsoft's license specifically allowed them to also license DOS to other companies, where it was known as MS-DOS. MS-DOS saw its last update to version 8.0 in the year 2000 with the release of the travesty that was Windows ME. IBM's version, variously known as IBM DOS and PC DOS, was last updated around 2003, but that one wasn't released as its own product, instead being used as part of other products, somewhat similar to the integration of MS-DOS 7 into Windows 95. The last full version of IBM's DOS was PC-DOS 2000 in, yes, the year 2000. There is one main modern DOS system, called FreeDOS, which had its most recent release on Christmas Day 2016, and a release candidate a few months ago on May 3, 2021. FreeDOS is largely compatible with MS-DOS, although there are certain things that have to do with the system setup that are different. DR-DOS is also still around, kind of. Formerly owned by Novell and Caldera, and currently owned by DR-DOS Incorporated, formerly known as DeviceLogix. DR-DOS was created by Digital Research, the company founded by Gary Kildall, the man who created CP/M. And DOS was created as a clone of CP/M. What comes around goes around. If I remember correctly, DR-DOS was better than MS-DOS in the 80s and early 90s, but Microsoft deliberately screwed them by making pre-release versions of Windows refuse to load under non-MS-DOS systems, giving a fake error. I'm not going to go into details, but if you want to know who won that fight, well, Microsoft's still around, Digital Research, not so much. There's also PTS-DOS from the Russian company FizTechSoft. I've installed PTS-DOS in the past, but I don't really remember anything about it, good or bad. A version of PTS-DOS was also released by a German company named Paragon Technology Systems, which was founded by a group of programmers who left FizTechSoft and essentially stole the source code. I don't know anything about those two DOSes that you can't find on Wikipedia. Datalight's ROM-DOS was created as a DOS clone in the late 80s, meant for embedded systems. Wikipedia makes it seem like it has a lot of built-in things that normal DOS doesn't, like a built-in network stack, but I've never tried it, so I don't really know. Intelligent Micro Software released a system called Real32, which is based on a version of Digital Research's DOS called Multi-User DOS. Real32 isn't quite DOS, but it is, kinda. I'm not going to get into it. There are other DOSes that most people haven't heard of, most of which suck. And for those DOSes, the answer to the question, can you use it as a daily driver, is a resounding no. But for most DOSes, especially MS-DOS, it's a bit more complicated. So let's take things a bit at a time, starting with basic usability. Operating systems with a graphical interface, which is pretty much all modern OSs, work in pretty much the same way. Using a touchscreen or a mouse or a similar device, select an icon or a bit of text or whatever, and manipulate it in some way, whether that's clicking it, dragging it, selecting it, or what have you. But with a text-based interface, which DOS most definitely is, you interact with the system by typing in commands, and you often get results back in a text-based format. For example, in Windows, to see the contents of a folder, you double-click the folder to open it up and view the contents. But in DOS, you have to tell the system to display a directory listing. Almost everything about text-based OSs is completely non-intuitive, especially to someone who's never used one before. How would you know what to type? How would you know what to do? How would you know that there even is something to do? Sure, some systems include a help command, but how would one even know to try that? Now, I'm speaking as someone who literally grew up using DOS. My mother's first computer was an IBM PC clone in the mid-80s, and it ran, you guessed it, DOS. We never even had Windows until my senior year of high school. That's not to say we didn't have anything graphical, but our computers were always first and foremost for my mother's businesses. We didn't spend money on computer games because we had consoles. What computer games I had, I got from friends, and they usually had pretty primitive graphics. Anyway, getting back to usability. DOS has a pretty steep learning curve, and starting this late in the game, if you're not already at least familiar with how to use it, you're not likely to be able to use the system very well. Next, let's address hardware support. In general, DOS doesn't have full support for anything newer than, say, 15 or 20 years ago. Manufacturers just aren't writing DOS drivers anymore, and they have no reason to. There are some things like third-party USB stacks that can make things a bit better, and some general-purpose audio, video, and network drivers, but for the most part, you're not going to get 1080p or surround sound, much less 4K video or better. Application support is somewhat better. There are programs to do most modern tasks, although few of them are recent. Word processing and programming are both okay, with plenty of both types of programs available, but don't expect many modern features, and many programming languages don't have DOS versions. Internet browsing is minimally functional. To my knowledge, there is only one graphical web browser for DOS, called Arachne, and it doesn't support any modern web standards. Viewing images is so-so, depending on what level of support your hardware has. Ditto audio and video, with the added bonus of no support for modern standards. Perhaps the best thing about using DOS is that there is literally 4.5 decades of software to choose from. So, is DOS good as a daily driver? That depends largely on how experienced you are with the system and your comfort level with it. For someone like me, yes, I could easily switch back to DOS on a full-time basis. For someone with no experience in a text-based OS, no, not at all. Not without some time spent learning how to do things and generally make things work. Now, as a caveat to the above, installing a graphical interface, and that's any GUI, not just Windows, will make things much easier. If you don't want Windows, you can try Gem or its more modern version, Breadbox Ensemble, or DeskView or Seal, or, well, there's a number of DOS GUIs if you care to look for them, but that's another video entirely. Or several, really. And that wraps things up for this episode. Stay tuned for the next episode, where I'll be covering OS 2. If you like this video, please thumb it up. If you didn't, well, we're, what, 8 episodes in? Why are you still watching? If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section, and I'll get around to answering them eventually, I swear. I'm always interested in suggestions on what OSs to cover. If you want to see me cover a particular OS, leave your suggestion in the comments section and I'll see what I can do. My name is Eric, and thanks for watching this episode of Daily Drivers.